In strutted Lauren, my soon-to-be ex-wife, wearing a red dress that looked like it cost more than my first car and screamed, "I'm the villain in a movie where the protagonist is way too good for me." The dress hugged every curve like it was getting paid overtime, and her heels clicked on the hardwood floor with the rhythm of a ticking time bomb. Her hair was done up in one of those fancy updos that probably required a YouTube tutorial and the patience of a saint, and her makeup was flawless in that "I woke up like this, but actually spent 90 minutes on it" kind of way. Behind her, trailing like a lost puppy who'd somehow wandered into the wrong house, was Bradley. Ah yes, Bradley. The boyfriend. The side piece. The guy who once borrowed my Callaway golf clubs for a work tournament and returned them 3 months later with mysterious grass stains, a broken 9-iron, and an attitude that suggested I should be grateful he returned them at all. He was wearing a designer sweater that probably cost more than most people's rent, his hair gelled back in that douchey Wall Street way, and he had this grin plastered on his face that made him look like a discount Bond villain who'd been rejected from the audition for being too obviously evil. "Time to pay up," Bradley said, his voice dripping with the kind of smugness usually reserved for people who've never actually earned anything in their lives but think they're God's gift to humanity because they drive a leased BMW and own 3 pairs of expensive loafers. I took another sip of my cocoa, mainly because I needed something to do with my hands that didn't involve throwing said cocoa directly into Bradley's smug face. The marshmallows had melted into little white clouds, and honestly, they were having a better morning than me. Lauren stepped forward, her heels clicking with each deliberate step, and pulled out a shiny red gift bag from behind her back. You know, one of those fancy bags with tissue paper sticking out the top that makes you think you're getting something nice, like a watch or a bottle of expensive bourbon, but instead delivers soul-crushing disappointment. She handed it to me with this little smile that would have been charming if I didn't know it was attached to a woman who'd been sleeping with her work husband for the better part of a year. "Merry Christmas," she said, her voice sweet as artificial sweetener and just as fake. I set down my cocoa, reached into the bag, pushed aside the tissue paper that probably cost $5 on its own, and pulled out a manila folder. Inside were divorce papers, professionally printed, already notarized, and organized with little sticky tabs that said things like "sign here" and "initial here" in case I was too stupid to figure out where my John Hancock was supposed to go. Classy. Really classy, Lauren. Behind me, I heard my sister Jenny's voice from the kitchen, where she'd apparently been watching this whole circus unfold. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," she muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. She'd come over early to help with Christmas breakfast, and now she was getting dinner and a show. On Christmas? Really? That's your move? Lauren didn't even glance her way. She was too busy staring at me with those ice blue eyes, waiting for the breakdown, the begging, the dramatic scene where I fell to my knees and pleaded for another chance. Bradley stood behind her like some kind of designer-clothed bodyguard, his arms crossed, probably imagining himself as the hero of this story instead of the home-wrecking cliché he actually was. Here's the thing about being married to someone for 7 years. You learn their playbook. You memorize their moves. You know when they're bluffing, when they're serious, and when they've been planning something for months and think they're being clever about it. Lauren thought she had me cornered. She thought this was checkmate. She thought she'd orchestrated the perfect exit, timing it for maximum emotional damage, bringing her lawyer and her boyfriend as backup, probably expecting me to either explode in rage or crumble in despair. Instead, I uncapped my pen, the Mont Blanc she'd given me for our 5th anniversary, back when she still pretended to care, and signed those papers faster than she could say irreconcilable differences. I flipped through each page, initialed every sticky tab, signed the final page with a flourish that would have made John Hancock himself proud, and slid the folder back across the coffee table. The silence that followed could have cooked popcorn. You could have heard a snowflake land outside. Even the fire seemed to stop crackling for a second, like it was holding its breath waiting to see what would happen next. Lauren's confident smile faltered. Just a little. Just enough for me to notice. Bradley's grin slipped too, confusion replacing smugness like a software update he hadn't authorized. Behind them stood Mr. Trent, Lauren's lawyer, a weaselly little man in an expensive suit who probably charged $500 an hour to make people's lives miserable. He was already reaching for his briefcase, probably ready to file these papers before I could change my mind. That's when I stood up, walked over to the Christmas tree, the one I'd put up by myself because Lauren was too busy with work, and pulled out a small silver box with a red ribbon that I'd hidden behind a ridiculous porcelain angel ornament her mother had given us years ago. "Got you something too," I said, handing the box to Mr. Trent, whose confusion was almost adorable in its completeness. He opened it with the cautious movements of a man defusing a bomb, pulled out a single sheet of paper, and read it. I watched his face go through more color changes than a mood ring at a teenager's sleepover. Confusion, recognition, understanding, and finally, the pale white of someone who's just realized they're standing in the middle of a minefield wearing clown shoes. He turned to Lauren, his hands actually shaking, and whispered in a voice that somehow carried through the entire room. "You need to start begging. Now." Bradley blinked like someone had just unplugged his brain and forgotten to plug it back in. What's going on?" "Me?" I just smiled, picked up my cocoa, and took another sip. It was still warm. The marshmallows were perfect. Outside, snow was starting to fall, covering the neighborhood in a blanket of white that made everything look clean and new and full of possibility. Christmas was about to get very, very interesting. You know what's funny about people who think they're smart? They assume everyone else is stupid. It's like a natural law of the universe or something. The more someone brags about their MBA from Yale, the more likely they are to overlook the fine print that's about to absolutely wreck their entire existence. And Lauren? Oh, Lauren had 3 degrees, spoke 4 languages, and could negotiate a corporate merger while simultaneously checking her Instagram and ordering a salad with 12 specific modifications. But she forgot one tiny, insignificant, totally irrelevant detail. She married a finance guy. Not just any finance guy, mind you. The kind who reads contracts like normal people read Harry Potter, with intense focus, taking notes, staying up way too late, and muttering, "Oh, that's clever," at random intervals. The kind who actually enjoys tax season because it's like solving a really complicated puzzle where the prize is not going to federal prison. The kind who once spent an entire weekend reading through our mortgage documents and found 3 separate errors that saved us $17,000, which Lauren spent on a handbag that looked suspiciously identical to the one she already owned. So yeah, when Lauren decided to play corporate chess with my life, she made one fatal miscalculation. She assumed I'd been sitting around for the last year eating chips and watching sports, completely oblivious to her little extracurricular activities with Bradley the Wonder Douche. Narrator voice. I had not been oblivious. See, about 8 months ago, I noticed things. Little things. The way she started coming home later, smelling like cologne that definitely wasn't mine. And trust me, I know what I smell like. And it's not Ego by Giorgio Armani, or whatever Bradley bathed himself in. The way she'd smile at her phone, and then quickly flip it over when I walked into the room, like a teenager hiding TikTok from their parents. The way, working late, became her default excuse for everything, even on Saturdays, because apparently corporate emergencies only happen after 7 p.m. and conveniently require Bradley's presence. I'm not an idiot. I know what cheating looks like. I've watched enough true crime documentaries to know that the spouse is always either completely clueless or secretly planning their revenge. I chose option B. So I did what any self-respecting finance nerd would do. I started digging. Not in some creepy stalker way. I'm not hiding in bushes with binoculars like a discount private investigator. No, I went straight to the source that never lies: paperwork. Documents. The boring stuff that makes normal people's eyes glaze over, but makes my heart sing like a caffeinated accountant on audit day. Lauren's company, Whitmore Enterprises, was her baby. Well, technically it was her father's baby that he'd handed over to her 5 years ago when he decided to semi-retire, which apparently meant playing golf 4 days a week and showing up to the office just long enough to terrify junior executives. The company was worth about $40 million, employed 200 people, and had enough bureaucratic red tape to wrap around the earth twice. And buried in that red tape, hidden in the founding documents from 1987, written in that special legal language that makes your brain want to shut down and take a nap, was Clause 7.3. I found it on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays are trash day, and I was taking out the recycling when I thought, you know what sounds fun? Reading 30-year-old corporate bylaws. Ginny, my sister, was right. I really did need more hobbies. Clause 7.3 was beautiful in its simplicity. Basically, It said that if the CEO of Whitmore Enterprises promoted anyone currently under an active ethics investigation by the company's internal compliance department, the board of directors would automatically trigger an emergency leadership vote. No warnings, no second chances, just immediate consequences, like cosmic karma, but with more paperwork. Now, guess what Lauren did 3 months ago? Go on, guess. I'll wait. She promoted Bradley from senior account manager to vice president of strategic development, a title so vague it could mean anything from actually important to we made this up to justify his salary. And guess who'd been under investigation by the compliance department for the last 4 months for allegedly manipulating expense reports and charging personal purchases to the company card? If you guessed Bradley, congratulations. You're officially smarter than my soon-to-be ex-wife. The investigation had been quiet. Hush hush. The kind of thing that gets buried in internal memos and whispered about in break rooms. But it was there, documented, official, and absolutely real. Some intern in accounting had flagged suspicious charges, expensive dinners, hotel rooms, shopping sprees at stores that definitely didn't sell office supplies unless Office Depot started carrying Gucci. The compliance department had opened an investigation, and Bradley was technically still under review when Lauren decided to promote him. She thought she was being clever. She thought she could push it through before anyone noticed, hide it under the chaos of quarterly earnings and restructuring announcements. She thought she had enough power, enough control, enough daddy's money influence to make problems disappear. She thought wrong. Back in the living room, Bradley was still standing there looking like someone had just explained cryptocurrency to him, using only interpretive dance. His mouth was hanging open slightly, which wasn't a good look for him, but was extremely entertaining for me. I don't understand, he said, which honestly tracked because I don't think Bradley understood most things that didn't involve mirrors or hair gel. Let me break it down for you, I said, settling back into the couch with my cocoa. See, when you accepted that promotion from Lauren, you were still under investigation for ethics violations. Specifically, charging $17,000 worth of personal expenses to the company card over 6 months. Romantic dinners, weekend getaways, gifts for people who definitely weren't your wife. Oh wait, you're not married. Gifts for people who were definitely someone else's wife. Lauren's face had gone from confused to pale to slightly green, like a traffic light malfunctioning in slow motion. How do you? Room 407 at the Midtown Marriott was a particularly poor choice, by the way. I continued, examining my fingernails like we were discussing the weather instead of her complete professional implosion. Security cameras in the hallway, Bradley. Really high-quality ones, too. And you checked in under the company account. The company account that I, as Lauren's spouse, technically have partial access to for tax purposes. Whoops. Bradley actually stumbled backward, bumping into an end table and nearly knocking over a lamp that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The lamp wobbled but stayed upright, which was more than I could say for Bradley's composure. Mr. Trent, the lawyer who was supposed to be Lauren's ace in the hole, had pulled out his phone and was frantically trying to dial someone. His hands were shaking so badly, I'm surprised he could even unlock the screen. Sure, go ahead and call whoever you want, I said cheerfully. Call the board. Call her father. Call the Pope. But here's the thing, Trent, you can't unsign your own career. That clause is ironclad. Lauren promoted someone under investigation, which means the board has to vote. And when they vote, they're going to find out about the affair, the expense fraud, and the fact that their CEO has been compromising company integrity for some really mediocre office romance. Trent put the phone down like it had suddenly turned into a live grenade. Jenny emerged from the kitchen with a plate of cookies she'd been baking, took one look at everyone's faces, and said, "Well, this is way better than the crown. Anyone want a snickerdoodle?" I took 2. They were still warm. Christmas was turning out pretty great after all. Let me take you back 3 months, to a time when I still had a shred of hope that my marriage might survive, and I hadn't yet perfected my recipe for the world's most passive-aggressive Christmas revenge. It was September, one of those weird transitional months where you're not sure if you need a jacket or just your existential dread to keep you warm, and I was sitting in the back of an Uber heading toward the one place I'd successfully avoided for the last 2 years, Harold Whitmore's personal study. Now, Harold Whitmore wasn't just Lauren's father. He was the Harold Whitmore, The guy who'd built Whitmore Enterprises from a struggling textile company into a multi-million-dollar corporate empire through sheer force of will, strategic ruthlessness, and what I can only assume was a complete absence of anything resembling human empathy. The man didn't have a heart. He had a quarterly earnings report where his feelings should be. He measured respect in Rolexes, success in stock options, and human worth in how quickly you could read a balance sheet. He'd never liked me. From the moment Lauren brought me home 7 years ago, fresh out of grad school with my finance degree and my optimistic belief that love could conquer all, Harold had looked at me like I was a participation trophy that had somehow wandered into his trophy case full of actual achievements. I wasn't Ivy League enough, wasn't connected enough, wasn't ruthless enough. I actually cared about things like ethics and treating people with basic human decency, which in Harold's world was roughly equivalent to showing up to a business meeting wearing a clown costume. But here's the thing about Harold. He respected order. He respected evidence. He respected anyone who did their homework and came prepared with facts instead of feelings. And boy, did I have facts. The Uber dropped me off in front of his estate in the fancy part of town, where even the trees looked expensive and judgmental. His house was one of those modern architectural nightmares that probably won awards, but looked like someone had stacked a bunch of glass boxes on top of each other and called it art. I'm pretty sure the driveway cost more than my entire college education. His assistant, Margaret, a woman in her 60s who'd been with Harold since the Reagan administration and had probably seen more corporate warfare than actual soldiers, met me at the door. She was wearing a cashmere sweater set that screamed, "I make 6 figures to answer phones and protect my boss from idiots." And she looked at me with the kind of expression usually reserved for unexpected house guests or jury duty summons. "Mr. Whitmore is expecting you," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of professional courtesy that really meant, "I have no idea why he agreed to see you, but here we are." She led me through a house that looked like it had been decorated by someone whose only instruction was, make it look expensive and soulless. Everything was white, black, or chrome. The art on the walls was the kind of abstract stuff that could be either worth millions or something a toddler made, and honestly, I couldn't tell the difference. We passed a dining room with a table that could seat 20, a living room with furniture that looked like it had never been sat on, and finally arrived at Harold's study. The study was different. This was where Harold actually lived. Dark wood paneling, leather chairs that had been worn in by decades of important conversations and casual brutality, and bookshelves lined with first editions and corporate history books. Behind a massive mahogany desk sat the man himself, Harold Whitmore, wearing what I can only describe as business casual for Bond villains. Expensive slacks, a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my car payment, and reading glasses that somehow made him look more intimidating instead of grandfatherly. "Sit," he said, not looking up from whatever document he was reviewing. Not hello, not good to see you. Just sit, like I was a moderately well-trained dog. I sat in the leather chair across from his desk, setting my briefcase down beside me. My hands were sweating. My heart was doing that thing where it forgets how to beat at a normal rhythm and instead decides to audition for a death metal band. This was either going to be the smartest thing I'd ever done or the moment that got me completely cut out of my wife's life and possibly sued into oblivion. Harold set down his document, removed his glasses, and finally looked at me with those cold blue eyes that Lauren had inherited along with his complete inability to express normal human emotions. "You asked for this meeting. I have 12 minutes before a call with Tokyo. Make it count. No pressure or anything." I opened my briefcase and pulled out a folder. Not just any folder. A folder that represented 3 months of my life spent turning into an amateur private investigator / corporate spy / person who definitely needed better hobbies. Inside were photos, receipts, emails, text message screenshots, credit card statements, hotel records, and enough time-stamped evidence to make a detective weep with joy. I slid it across the desk. Harold opened it without ceremony, flipped through the pages with the casual efficiency of someone reading the morning newspaper, and showed absolutely zero emotional reaction. He looked at photos of his daughter and Bradley having dinner at restaurants I couldn't afford. He read text messages that would make a romance novelist blush. He examined expense reports that showed a pattern of fraud so obvious it was almost insulting. He reviewed hotel check-in records, restaurant receipts, shopping sprees, Weekend getaways. All documented, all undeniable, all paid for with company money. When he finished, he closed the folder, set it aside, and did something I absolutely did not expect. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a crystal decanter that probably cost more than my annual salary. He slid one across the desk to me. "She's gotten sloppy," he said, his voice completely neutral, like we were discussing quarterly projections instead of his daughter's affair and corporate fraud. I took the whiskey because when a man like Harold Whitmore offers you a drink, you take it. The whiskey was smooth, expensive, and burned in exactly the right way. Probably 50-year-old Scotch or something equally ridiculous. "I didn't come here to destroy her," I said, which was partially true. Mostly I came here because I was out of options and Harold was the only person who had more power than Lauren in this situation. "No," Harold agreed, taking a sip of his own whiskey. "You came here because you're smart enough to know that I care more about the company than I care about family drama. You came here because you want me to fix this before it becomes a public embarrassment." He wasn't wrong. Harold stood up, walked over to an antique safe hidden behind a panel in the bookshelf. Because of course he had a hidden safe. This wasn't his first corporate intrigue rodeo, and pulled out a sealed envelope. It was fancy, the kind with a wax seal that had the Whitmore Company crest pressed into it, all official and ominous looking. He handed it to me. "This is Clause 7.3, he said, "buried in the founding documents. If she disgraces this family, if she compromises the integrity of this company, you deliver this to the board. She won't see it coming." I stared at the envelope like it was radioactive. "I'm not your hitman." Harold actually smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a shark that had just spotted something wounded in the water. "No," he said. "You're worse, you're thorough." He wasn't wrong about that either. That envelope went straight into my fireproof safe when I got home, tucked right next to our wedding album and my last ounce of patience. And there it stayed, waiting for exactly the right moment. Turns out, that moment was Christmas morning. While I was sitting by my fireplace sipping scotch and watching Lauren's lawyer have what I can only describe as a full-body panic attack in real time, something absolutely magical was happening across town at Whitmore Enterprises headquarters. And I say magical in the same way a train wreck is magical. You can't look away, it's absolutely terrible, and someone definitely should have seen it coming. See, that little silver box I'd given to Mr. Trent? It didn't just contain information about Clause 7.3. It contained a pre-written formal complaint to the board of directors, complete with references to specific sections of the company bylaws, documentation of Bradley's ethics investigation, proof of Lauren's knowledge of said investigation, and a timeline of events that made it crystal clear this wasn't an accident or oversight. This was deliberate, calculated, and precisely the kind of thing that makes corporate boards lose their collective minds. And Mr. Trent, being the overpriced lawyer he was, had a legal obligation to deliver that complaint to the board immediately upon receipt. It was right there in the fine print of his retainer agreement with Whitmore Enterprises. Any formal complaint regarding potential CEO misconduct had to be reported within 1 business hour of discovery. Failure to do so would result in disbarment, massive fines, and probably a lengthy prison sentence for obstruction of justice or whatever lawyers go to jail for when they're bad at lawyering. So while Lauren was standing in my living room trying to figure out how her perfect divorce ambush had gone so spectacularly sideways, Mr. Trent was furiously typing on his phone, sending emergency notifications to every board member like he was trying to warn people about an incoming asteroid. The board of Whitmore Enterprises consisted of 12 people, and I'd done my homework on every single one of them. There was Margaret Shun, the CFO who'd been with the company for 20 years and had exactly zero patience for nonsense. Robert Davidson, the operations director who ran the company's day-to-day like a military general who'd had too much coffee. Patricia Holbrook, the head of compliance who probably woke up every morning hoping to catch someone violating policy so she could flex her bureaucratic muscles. And 9 other executives who all had one thing in common. They cared way more about the company's reputation and their own stock options than they cared about protecting Lauren's feelings. Within 30 minutes of Mr. Trent sending his emergency notifications, all 12 board members had been summoned to an emergency meeting. And because this was a potential CEO misconduct situation, the meeting had to be held immediately, on-site, with no exceptions. Company policy. Harold had written it himself back in the 90s after some scandal I was too young to remember, but had definitely read about in my deep dive through company history. Lauren, still standing in my living room looking like someone had just told her Santa wasn't real, and also he was pressing charges, received a text message. I watched her pull out her phone, read it, and go through approximately 17 different facial expressions in the span of 5 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, anger, more confusion, panic, that specific shade of pale that people get right before they either throw up or pass out or both. "I have to go," she said, her voice tight. "Hot date?" I asked innocently, taking another sip of my cocoa. The marshmallows were completely melted now, but honestly, that's when cocoa is best. She didn't answer. She just grabbed her purse, shot Bradley a look that probably meant something like, "Fix this," or "Why are you so useless?" or possibly both, and practically sprinted out of my house in those ridiculous heels. I heard her car start in the driveway, the engine revving way harder than necessary, and then the screech of tires as she peeled out like she was auditioning for Fast and Furious, Corporate Fraud Edition. Bradley stood there for another moment, looking like a golden retriever who'd just been told he was a bad boy and didn't understand why. "Should I?" He gestured vaguely toward the door. "Oh, absolutely," I said. "You definitely want to be there for what's about to happen. Front row seats to the apocalypse, buddy. Don't want to miss it." He left too, though with significantly less urgency and way more confusion. Jenny came back into the living room, eating another cookie, and said, "You're kind of terrifying. You know that?" "I prefer thorough," I replied. What I didn't tell Jenny, or Lauren, or Bradley, or anyone, was that I'd also taken the liberty of sending Harold a heads-up text about 3 minutes before Lauren arrived that morning. Nothing detailed, just, "Merry Christmas. Check your board notifications." Harold, being Harold, had probably smiled his shark smile, canceled whatever plans he had for Christmas morning, and headed straight to the office. Because if there was one thing Harold loved more than money, it was order. And if there was one thing he loved more than order, it was watching people face consequences for their actions. By the time Lauren burst through the doors of Whitmore Enterprises headquarters, and I'm assuming she burst because Lauren didn't do anything subtly, the board was already assembled in the main conference room on the executive floor. This wasn't just any conference room. This was the conference room, the one with the massive table made from some endangered tree that was probably illegal to own, the chairs that cost $5,000 each, and the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city like a supervillain's lair. Harold sat at the head of the table, because of course he did, even in semi-retirement. Even though Lauren was technically CEO, Harold's presence commanded the room like gravity commands planets. He was wearing one of his expensive suits, the kind that cost more than most people's monthly salary, and he had that expression on his face that I'd learned to recognize over the years, the one that meant someone was about to get absolutely destroyed, and he was going to enjoy every second of it. Lauren, according to what I heard later from my source on the inside, Margaret the assistant, who I'd been very nice to over the years and who appreciated someone who actually said, "Please," and "Thank you," came into that conference room looking like she'd just run a marathon in heels. Her hair, previously perfect, was windblown. Her makeup had that slightly smudged quality that comes from stress sweating in a luxury car. Her red dress, still gorgeous, now seemed less powerful villain and more person who's just realized they're actually the victim in this story. Patricia Holbrook, the head of compliance and a woman who I'm pretty sure had ice water running through her veins instead of blood, stood up and began reading from a document. Her voice was clear, professional, and absolutely merciless. The complaint had been received. The clause had been triggered. Bradley's ethics investigation was detailed in excruciating specificity. Every fraudulent expense, every suspicious charge, every hotel room and dinner and shopping spree. Then came the part about his promotion, dated exactly 3 weeks after the investigation had officially begun, signed by Lauren herself, approved without consulting the board or compliance. Lauren tried to interrupt. "This is ridiculous. I can explain." Harold didn't even look at her. He just raised one hand slightly, and the room went silent. That's power. That's the kind of control you get when you've spent 40 years building an empire and everyone knows you could destroy their career with a single phone call. "The board will now vote," Patricia continued, "on the immediate termination of Bradley Morrison's employment and the temporary suspension of CEO Lauren Whitmore pending a full investigation into potential ethics violations and breach of fiduciary duty. One by one, hands went up around the table. Margaret Chin, up. Robert Davidson, up. Patricia Holbrook, up. Every single board member raised their hand like they were in elementary school, and the teacher had just asked who wanted extra recess. 12 hands. Unanimous vote. No discussion necessary. Bradley's employment was terminated effective immediately. His key card, which he'd apparently tried to use to get into the building about 5 minutes earlier, had already been deactivated. Security was probably escorting him out right now, carrying his box of personal belongings, which I'm guessing consisted mostly of hair products and protein powder. Lauren was suspended, pending investigation, which in corporate speak meant, you're probably fired, but we have to pretend there's due process. And Harold? Harold sat there sipping water from a crystal glass like he was watching his favorite soap opera, which I guess he technically was. Somewhere in the building, an HR intern definitely whispered, "Oof. Merry Christmas indeed." Back at my place, I was settling into what I can only describe as the most relaxing Christmas morning I'd had in years. Jenny had made herself comfortable on the other end of the couch, feet tucked under her, scrolling through her phone and occasionally looking up to say things like, "You're my hero," and "I can't believe you actually pulled this off," and "Mom's going to lose her mind when she finds out." My mom. Right. That was going to be a fun conversation. Helen Morrison, the woman who'd spent the last 7 years convinced that Lauren was the best thing that ever happened to me, who'd overlooked every red flag like they were just festive decorations, who'd defended Lauren's busy work schedule and career ambitions like she was running for sainthood instead of running a company into ethical bankruptcy. Mom was going to need several glasses of wine and probably a stress ball to process this one. But that was a problem for later. Right now, I was living in the moment, and the moment was pretty damn spectacular. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize, but the message made me smile. Security just escorted someone out carrying a box of hair gel and a framed photo of himself. Thought you'd want to know. Margaret. Beautiful, efficient, quietly vindictive Margaret, who'd been Harold's assistant for 30 years and had probably seen more corporate drama than Netflix could produce in a decade. I'd sent her a fruit basket last Christmas when Lauren forgot, and apparently, that small gesture of human decency had bought me a corporate spy. Life lesson: always be nice to assistants. They know everything, see everything, and will absolutely choose sides when things go nuclear. I texted back, "You're invited to my New Year's party." Her response was immediate. "Will there be champagne?" "The expensive kind. I'll bring evidence of expense fraud as a party favor." I genuinely laughed out loud. Margaret was savage, and I respected that immensely. Jenny looked over. "What's so funny? Bradley just got escorted out of the building by security, carrying a box of his personal belongings like he's in a movie about corporate failure." Jenny snorted. "What did he even keep at the office?" "His collection of mirror selfies. According to my source, hair gel and a framed photo of himself." Of course he had a framed photo of himself. Of course. That man is a walking LinkedIn profile that gained sentience and decided to ruin marriages for fun. She wasn't wrong. Bradley was the kind of guy who probably had business cards made with his gym statistics on them. The kind who used words like synergy and paradigm shift in casual conversation. The kind who thought wearing expensive clothes made him interesting instead of just expensive. He was basically if a motivational poster came to life, got a gym membership, and developed a personality disorder. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a longer message from Margaret. Board meeting concluded. Unanimous vote. Morrison terminated. L suspended pending investigation. Harold hasn't smiled this much since the merger in '08. She tried to argue. He literally turned his chair around and looked out the window. Patricia Holbrook gave her the full compliance lecture. I think she's crying in her car now. Part of me. A very small, rapidly shrinking part that still remembered our wedding day and honeymoon in Italy and the way she used to laugh at my terrible jokes. Felt bad. Like, maybe I went too far bad. Like, this is someone's daughter and I just orchestrated her professional destruction bad. But then I remembered the divorce papers wrapped in a gift bag. I remembered Bradley's smug grin. I remembered a year of lies, late nights, mysterious expenses, and the complete disrespect of thinking I was too stupid or too complacent to notice. I remembered her parading her affair partner into our home on Christmas morning like she was presenting a prize instead of a homewrecker. Yeah, the guilt evaporated pretty quickly. Jenny was watching me with that expression siblings get when they know exactly what you're thinking. Don't, she said. Don't what? Don't feel bad. She literally tried to divorce bomb you on Christmas with her boyfriend standing there like some kind of smug backup dancer. She made her choices. You just made sure those choices had consequences. When did you become so wise? I've been wise. You just usually don't listen because you're too busy trying to be the good guy. She threw a cookie at me. It bounced off my chest and landed on the couch. Stop being the good guy. Be the guy who protects himself. Be the guy who doesn't let people treat him like a doormat with a 401k. I ate the cookie. It was still delicious. My phone rang. Actual phone call, not a text. The caller ID said Dad. Oh boy. My father, Richard Morrison, the most drama-verse human being on planet Earth, a man who once left a restaurant because the couple next to us was arguing too loudly, was calling me on Christmas morning. This could only mean one thing. Word had spread. I answered. Hey Dad, your mother just got a call from Helen Whitmore. His voice was carefully neutral, the tone he used when he was trying very hard not to have an opinion about something that clearly required opinions. She's concerned. I bet she is. She says Lauren is very upset. Something about the board and Bradley, and you giving her lawyer some kind of document that caused problems. Problems is one way to describe corporate fraud and ethics violations, yeah. There was a long pause. Then, did you actually do what I think you did? Depends. What do you think I did? Outsmarted everyone, documented everything, and waited until exactly the right moment to blow up your wife's entire professional life as revenge for her cheating on you with her coworker. Then yes. Yes, I did. Another pause. Then, quietly, good. I nearly dropped the phone. My father, the man who once apologized to a telemarketer for wasting their time, the man who felt guilty returning items to stores even with receipts, the man who'd never said a harsh word about anyone in his entire life, just said, good, about me orchestrating someone's career destruction. Really? I asked. Son, I've watched you bend over backwards for that woman for 7 years. I've watched you compromise, accommodate, and excuse behavior that would have made me pack my bags after 6 months. I've watched her treat you like you were an accessory instead of a partner. And I've kept my mouth shut because you seemed happy, or at least content. And who was I to interfere? He took a breath. But what she did today, coming into your home with that man, on Christmas, handing you divorce papers like a party favor? That's cruel. That's intentionally cruel. So yeah, good. I'm proud of you. My throat felt tight. My eyes might have been slightly watery. Damn cookies were making me emotional. Definitely the cookies. Thanks, Dad. Your mother wants to know if you're coming to dinner. Is she going to yell at me? Probably. But I'll make sure there's extra pie. I'll be there. We hung up. Jenny was looking at me with that knowing expression again. Dad's on your side? Dad's on my side. Miracles really do happen on Christmas. Outside, snow continued to fall. My phone kept buzzing with texts from people I hadn't heard from in months. Apparently, news of Lauren's boardroom spectacular had spread faster than holiday gossip at a family reunion. My cocoa was cold now, but I didn't care. For the first time in a year, I felt like I could actually breathe. There's something poetic about watching someone realize they've been outmaneuvered, and by poetic, I mean the kind of schadenfreude-filled poetry that would make Shakespeare stand up and slow clap from beyond the grave. That night, around 9 p.m., I was sitting in my home office. Well, my home, my office, legally and officially mine in every possible way, working on absolutely nothing important, but pretending to be busy because it made me feel productive. I had a glass of whiskey that was probably too expensive for a Tuesday night, some jazz playing softly in the background because apparently I'd become that guy, and my laptop open to a spreadsheet that I was definitely not actually reading. That's when I heard it. The sound of a car pulling up to the gate, then stopping, then the electronic beep of someone entering a code, then silence, then another beep, more silence, then a series of increasingly frantic beeps that sounded like someone was playing a very stressful game of electronic Simon Says and losing badly. I walked over to the window, careful to stay back far enough that I wouldn't be immediately visible, and looked down at the driveway. Lauren's Mercedes was sitting at the gate, headlights cutting through the darkness, and I could see her silhouette in the driver's seat jabbing at the keypad like it had personally insulted her family. The gate, being an inanimate object with no feelings and an updated access code, remained completely unmoved by her efforts. Jenny, who decided to crash at my place for a few days because apparently my life had become more entertaining than cable television, appeared next to me with a bowl of popcorn. Actual popcorn. She'd made popcorn specifically for this moment. Is that? She started. Yep. And the code. Changed it this morning. Right after I changed the locks. You're my hero. You know that, right? We watched as Lauren got out of her car, slammed the door with enough force to probably dent it, and marched up to the gate in those ridiculous heels she always wore even though our driveway was gravel and completely inappropriate for stilettos. She grabbed the bars of the gate and shook them like she was in a Victorian prison drama, which honestly wasn't that far off from reality at this point. Then she started honking. Not short, polite honks. Long, aggressive, I'm having a complete meltdown honks that probably woke up every neighbor within a 3-block radius. Mrs. Henderson next door was definitely going to have opinions about this at the next HOA meeting, and I was absolutely going to let her express every single one of them. Open this gate. Lauren screamed into the darkness, her voice carrying across the yard with the kind of projection that suggested she'd missed her calling as a theater major. I live here. This is my house. Technically incorrect on both counts, but I appreciated the confidence. She pulled out her phone and started making calls. I'm assuming to the police, based on the way she kept gesturing dramatically and pointing at the gate like it was a defendant in a courtroom. Good luck with that one, Lauren. I'd already called the non-emergency line earlier today to give them a heads up that my soon-to-be ex-wife might show up and cause a scene, and the very nice officer I'd spoken with had made a note in their system that this was a civil property dispute and she had no legal right to access the premises. I'd also emailed them a copy of the deed, the divorce papers, and a timeline of events, because when you're going to do something, you might as well do it thoroughly. After about 20 minutes of honking, screaming, threatening, and generally behaving like someone who'd never heard the word consequences before, Lauren finally seemed to notice the box sitting on the front porch. I'd left it there earlier, right where she couldn't miss it, wrapped up in brown paper like a sad little care package from the universe's karmic distribution center. She abandoned her car, engine still running, doors still open, headlights still on like a beacon of poor life choices, and climbed over the gate. Climbed over it, in a designer dress and heels, which was honestly impressive from a pure athletic standpoint, even if it completely destroyed any remaining dignity she might have had left. Jenny whispered, "Should we be recording this? Security cameras are already on it. I upgraded the system last month. 4K resolution. Night vision. The works. You're terrifying. I prefer prepared." Lauren landed on the other side of the gate with all the grace of a baby giraffe learning to walk, stumbled, caught herself, and then marched up to the porch. She grabbed the box, ripped it open, and started pulling out the contents like she was defusing a bomb, but had forgotten all her training. 2 dresses. Not her favorites. Not her designer pieces, just 2 random dresses from the back of the closet that she probably forgot she owned. A toothbrush. A single toothbrush, still in its package, the cheap kind you buy at gas stations when you forget to pack for a trip. And a picture frame from years ago, the 3 of us at some company event where we'd all pretended to be a happy family. Me, Lauren, and Harold, smiling for the camera like we weren't all secretly miserable. The glass on the frame was cracked, right down the middle, splitting the image in half. I dropped it earlier, completely by accident, and then looked at the crack and thought, yeah, that's about right. So I left it. Lauren stared at that frame for a long moment, and even from the window, I could see her shoulders start to shake. Whether it was rage or sadness or just the cold December wind, I couldn't tell and honestly didn't particularly care. That's when she noticed the envelope taped to the door. She ripped it off, opened it with shaking hands, and pulled out the papers inside. Our prenup, the one she'd insisted on. The one her fancy lawyers had drafted specifically to protect her assets, her company shares, her family money. The one she'd made me sign while bragging about how smart she was for thinking ahead and protecting what's mine. I'd gone through it last week with a yellow highlighter and annotated every single clause. Every protection she'd added. Every stipulation she'd insisted on. Every little legal landmine she'd buried in there thinking she was being clever. Clause 3.2. In the event of infidelity, the offending party forfeits all claims to shared assets. Her handwriting in the margin from years ago. Just being thorough. Smiling face with smiling eyes. Clause 7.1. All property purchased with funds from one party remains sole property of that party. Her note. This protects both of us. Clause 12.5. In the event of divorce, each party retains only what they brought into the marriage plus documented individual earnings. Her addendum. Fair is fair. She protected herself right into having absolutely nothing. I watched her read through the pages, watched her face go from confused to horrified to that special shade of pale that people get when they realize they've played themselves. She used to say, "I just want what's fair," every time we'd argue about money or assets or whose name should go on which account. Good news, Lauren. That's exactly what you got. She looked up at the house, and for a second I thought she might see me standing at the window. But I'd already stepped back into the shadows, glass of whiskey in hand, feeling more at peace than I had in years. Outside, the wind picked up, scattering the papers from the box across the lawn. Inside, I raised my glass to the window. Merry Christmas, Lauren. Next time, read the fine print. If you've never watched someone's entire social life implode in real time through the magic of the internet, let me tell you, it's like watching a building get demolished in slow motion. Except the building is made of carefully curated Instagram posts and LinkedIn endorsements, and the demolition crew is just thousands of strangers with smartphones and way too much free time. The next morning, I woke up to discover that Lauren had apparently spent the entire night trying to do damage control, which is kind of like trying to put out a forest fire with a spray bottle full of gasoline. I made coffee. Good coffee. The expensive beans I'd hidden from Lauren because she always complained they were too pretentious, while simultaneously drinking $7 lattes that tasted like liquefied candy. I settled into the couch with my laptop, prepared to do absolutely nothing productive, and opened Twitter, or X, or whatever Elon was calling it this week. And holy hell, the internet had been busy. Apparently, while I'd been sleeping the peaceful sleep of the righteously vindicated, Lauren had been calling everyone. And I mean everyone. Old friends from college who she hadn't spoken to in years. Coworkers who'd probably been avoiding her calls even before the scandal. Distant relatives who only showed up to family events for the free food. Her sister Emma, who'd blocked her number 6 months ago after some argument about a borrowed necklace that never got returned. Lauren was burning through her contact list like it was a limited-time clearance sale, and she needed to hit every store before they closed. The problem? Nobody was picking up. It was like watching someone try to make a phone call during the apocalypse and slowly realizing that maybe, just maybe, all the towers were down and they were completely alone. Loyalty, as it turns out, has office hours. And those office hours definitely don't include 3 a.m. panic calls from someone whose entire life just exploded due to their own poor choices. Around 10 a.m., according to the timestamps I was now obsessively checking because my life had apparently become a full-time spectator sport, her best friend Monica finally responded. Not with a phone call, because that would require actual human interaction and potential emotional labor, but with a text message that got immediately screenshotted and shared approximately 8,000 times across various platforms. The text, which I saw on Twitter before it probably even finished sending on Monica's phone, said, "Girl, your Slack messages are everywhere." Short, simple, devastating. The kind of message that contains entire universes of "oh no" compressed into 6 words. Jenny came downstairs in her pajamas, took one look at my face, and said, "What happened? Did someone die?" "Better," I said. "Someone's reputation died." I turned the laptop toward her. She read for approximately 15 seconds before her mouth fell open in a way that would have been comical if it wasn't attached to pure, unfiltered shock. "Oh my God. Oh my God. Are these real? Every single one." See, those private Slack messages that Lauren had been having with Bradley for months? The ones where they'd been coordinating their affair, planning their future, and generally behaving like teenagers who'd just discovered texting? Yeah, those weren't so private anymore. Someone, and I'm not saying who, and I'm definitely not saying I had anything to do with it, because I absolutely didn't, had leaked the entire conversation history. Every message, every emoji, every "can't wait to see you" face blowing a kiss, and "thinking about last night" fire, and my personal favorite, the messages where she'd referred to me as the old furniture that she was ready to donate to Goodwill. But wait, there's more. Because Lauren wasn't just your garden variety cheater. No, she was an ambitious, strategic, remarkably stupid cheater who'd also been discussing financial plans with Bradley. Specifically, plans for how she was going to gut the estate and leave me with nothing. Her words. Actual direct quote. She'd typed them out in Slack, probably thinking the messages would disappear or no one would ever see them, forgetting that the internet is forever and IT departments exist. There were messages about hiding assets, messages about manipulating the divorce settlement, messages about how she'd already talked to lawyers about making sure I'd be too broke to fight back, messages about selling property that she didn't actually own, messages where she called me pathetic for not noticing the affair sooner, messages where she and Bradley literally laughed about how clueless I was. The internet was having an absolute field day. Twitter threads were being written that rivaled doctoral dissertations in length and detail. Reddit had at least 4 different threads going with titles like Corporate CEO Caught Cheating and Committing Fraud, and the most satisfying divorce revenge story you'll read today. TikTok influencers were making reaction videos where they read the messages out loud with increasingly dramatic gasps. Someone had already made a Spotify playlist called Songs for When Your Wife Calls You Old Furniture, and it was trending. Her PR team, the expensive one she'd hired after becoming CEO, the one that cost more per month than most people's mortgages, quit. Not quietly, not professionally. They released a statement that basically said, "We cannot and will not represent someone whose actions are indefensible, and also she hasn't paid our last invoice." Classy, accurate, devastating. Her investors, the ones who'd poured millions into Whitmore Enterprises based on her reputation and leadership, started fleeing like rats from a sinking ship. Except in this case, the ship wasn't sinking due to an iceberg. It was sinking because the captain had deliberately drilled holes in the hull while texting her boyfriend about it on company Slack. By noon, 3 major investors had publicly announced they were withdrawing their support. By 2 p.m., that number had jumped to 7. By evening, her company's stock had dropped 23% and was in free fall. The business news networks were covering it like it was the financial scandal of the decade. CNBC had a segment titled, "When CEOs Go Bad." A cautionary tale. Bloomberg wrote an editorial about corporate governance and ethical leadership. Forbes published an article analyzing how quickly a reputation can be destroyed in the digital age, using Lauren as their primary case study. And the comments. Oh God, the comments. Thousands upon thousands of people who'd never met Lauren, never heard of Whitmore Enterprises, didn't care about corporate drama, were all suddenly united in their absolute fascination with watching a privileged CEO get exactly what she deserved. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes appeared at least 400 times across various platforms. Gaslight, gatekeep, girlboss failed became a trending hashtag. Someone made a meme using that photo of the woman yelling at the cat, except they'd photoshopped Lauren's face on the woman and mine on the cat, with captions about prenups and fine print. My personal favorite comment, which had been liked over 50,000 times on Twitter, said, "Imagine calling your husband old furniture and then finding out he's actually a chess grandmaster and you've been playing checkers this whole time." Jenny looked up from her phone, where she'd been scrolling through the carnage with the kind of intensity usually reserved for binge-watching murder documentaries. "Did you leak this?" "Nope." "Did you have someone else leak it?" "Also nope. But you knew it would leak." I took a sip of my coffee. I didn't stop it from leaking. That's not the same thing as making it leak. That's some serious mental gymnastics right there. I prefer to call it passive archiving. I'm simply allowing information to exist in its natural state. Can I help it if that natural state is extremely public and embarrassing for certain people who should have been more careful about what they typed in allegedly private chat rooms? You're genuinely terrifying, and I mean that as the highest compliment. Thank you. Around 4 p.m., Lauren posted something on her own social media. A Notes app screenshot. The universal white flag of people whose lives are falling apart online. It said something about misunderstandings and taken out of context and my truth, and a bunch of other phrases that mean absolutely nothing but sound vaguely sympathetic. The internet's response. "Girl, we have the screenshots." All the screenshots. By evening, that post had been deleted. Her Twitter account went private. Her Instagram disappeared entirely. Her LinkedIn, the last bastion of professional respectability, showed her status as between opportunities, which is corporate speak for unemployed and unemployable. I didn't leak anything. I swear. I just didn't stop the leak. And really, is there a difference? That's not petty. That's passive archiving. And honestly, the internet was doing God's work. You know you've really screwed up your life when even your lawyer, the person you're literally paying hundreds of dollars an hour to defend you no matter what, decides that association with you is more damaging than the income you provide. That's the legal equivalent of a doctor taking one look at your symptoms and saying, "Yeah, I'm going to refer you to someone else because whatever you've got going on is above my pay grade and possibly contagious." 3 days after the great Slack message apocalypse, Lauren's fancy attorney finally made contact. Quentin Pierce, the guy whose name sounded like a character from a legal thriller, who wears suspenders and says things like "objection, Your Honor" in a really dramatic voice. He was one of those lawyers who had his own Wikipedia page, graduated from Harvard Law, and charged more per hour than most people make in a week. His office was in one of those glass skyscrapers downtown that looked like it was designed by someone who'd never heard of the concept of warmth or making people feel comfortable. Lauren had hired him 6 months ago, back when she was still convinced she was the smartest person in every room and thought having an expensive lawyer was the same as having an unbeatable legal strategy. She'd bragged about him at dinner parties. "Quentin Pierce is representing me," she'd say, dropping his name like it was supposed to make people bow down or something. "He's never lost a divorce case. Never." Well, Quentin, buddy, there's a first time for everything. I wasn't there for the phone call, obviously, but Jenny had a friend who worked at Quentin's firm, because apparently the universe had decided that my sister was now my personal intelligence network, and the details that filtered back to me were absolutely delicious. Better than the Italian food we'd ordered for lunch. Better than the bourbon I was sipping. Better than literally anything I'd watched on Netflix in the past year. According to the rumor mill, which I was choosing to believe because it was too perfect not to be true, Quentin called Lauren on a Wednesday afternoon. She'd been holed up in some budget hotel, not even a nice hotel, which must have killed her, probably living off room service and denial. She answered on the first ring, probably desperate for any communication from anyone who wasn't actively mocking her on the internet. "Lauren," he'd said, his voice carrying that particular tone of professional detachment that doctors use when they're about to deliver really bad news. "I'm withdrawing as your counsel." Lauren, according to my sister's friend's friend who was absolutely eavesdropping, and God bless them for it, laughed. Actually laughed. Like she thought it was a joke. Like Quentin Pierce, Harvard Law graduate and professional hardass, was suddenly developing a sense of humor in the middle of the biggest case of her life. "On what grounds?" she'd asked, still chuckling, probably thinking she had some kind of leverage, or that her family name still meant something, or that money could fix this particular problem. Quentin's response was immediate, cold, and absolutely perfect. Existence. Just that. One word. Existence. The legal equivalent of "I can't" even compressed into a single devastating syllable. The laughter stopped. Jenny's source said you could hear the exact moment Lauren realized he wasn't joking. The silence on the line apparently lasted long enough to be uncomfortable, like when you accidentally make eye contact with a stranger for too long and both of you are trying to figure out how to escape the situation. "You can't just quit," Lauren had said, her voice rising in that particular way it did when she was about to lose her temper. I'd heard that tone approximately 8,000 times during our marriage, usually right before she'd blame me for something that was definitely not my fault. "I'm paying you. You work for me." "Correction," Quentin had replied, and I'm imagining him sitting in his expensive office chair, looking out at the city skyline, completely unbothered by her escalating panic. "You were paying me. Past tense. And I worked for you under the assumption that your case had merit and that representing you wouldn't damage my professional reputation beyond repair." "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the files, Lauren. I read them. All of them. The Slack messages where you detailed plans to commit fraud. The expense reports showing misappropriation of company funds. The emails discussing asset concealment. The text messages proving premeditated infidelity and conspiracy to deprive your spouse of marital assets." Should I continue? More silence. The kind of silence that probably echoed. "I can explain." "You can't," Quentin interrupted. And here's the thing that you don't seem to understand. Despite having 3 college degrees and allegedly being a business genius, you didn't lose to him. You lost to yourself. That line right there? That was the chef's kiss of this entire conversation. The moment where a man who'd spent his entire career defending morally questionable people in divorce proceedings looked at Lauren's case and said, "Nope, this one's too far even for me." Jenny's source said that Quentin had then mentioned me, or more specifically, mentioned my lawyer. "Your husband hired Elias Finch," he'd said, and apparently there was something in his voice that suggested this was very bad news. Now, I hadn't actually told anyone except Jenny about Elias Finch yet, mainly because I'd only officially hired him 2 days ago, and partly because I was enjoying keeping that particular card close to my chest. But Elias Finch had a reputation in legal circles the same way that great white sharks have a reputation in the ocean. People knew his name. People feared his name. People told stories about his cases the way sailors tell stories about sea monsters. His nickname in the legal world, and I absolutely loved this, was the guillotine. Not because he was French, not because he was particularly violent, but because when Elias Finch took a case, heads rolled. Metaphorically speaking, he specialized in high-stakes divorces where one party had significantly wronged the other, and his win rate was something like 94%. The other 6% had settled out of court for terms so favorable to his clients that they might as well have been wins too. He was expensive. Not Quentin Pierce expensive, but you need to really want revenge to afford this expensive. He drove a Tesla, wore suits that cost more than used cars, and had an office that looked like it belonged in a movie about corporate takeovers. He also had a policy of only taking cases where he believed his client had been genuinely wronged, which meant that if Elias Finch agreed to represent you, it was basically a stamp of approval that said, "Yes, you are the victim here and your spouse is definitely the villain." I'd met with him last Monday. Walked into his office with 3 bankers' boxes full of documentation. The prenup, the Slack messages, financial records, emails, text messages, photos, receipts, and about 40 other pieces of evidence that painted a very clear picture of exactly what kind of person Lauren was and exactly what she'd been doing for the past year. Elias had spent 2 hours reviewing everything. Didn't say much. Just read, made notes, occasionally raised his eyebrows or made small sounds of interest. When he finished, he looked up at me with these sharp gray eyes and said, "This is the most well-documented case of marital fraud I've seen in 15 years. When do we start?" That was it. No moral hemming and hawing. No, "Are you sure you want to go this route?" No attempts to encourage reconciliation or meditation or any of that therapeutic nonsense that some lawyers try to push. Just pure, professional acknowledgement that Lauren had screwed up spectacularly and I had the receipts to prove it. Back to the phone call. Quentin had apparently told Lauren, "Elias Finch doesn't lose. More importantly, he doesn't take cases unless he's absolutely certain his client is in the right." The fact that he's representing your husband tells me everything I need to know about the merits of your position. So what am I supposed to do? Lauren had asked, and Jenny's source said she sounded like she was crying. Actually crying. The woman who never cried at movies, who called emotional displays unprofessional, who'd once told me that crying was manipulative weakness. That woman was apparently sobbing on the phone with her soon-to-be former lawyer. "I genuinely don't know," Quentin had said. "Find another attorney. Hope they don't read the news. Pray that your husband is more merciful than the evidence suggests you deserve. But Lauren, you need to understand something." "What?" "The prenup you insisted on? The one you were so proud of? It protects him now. The clause about infidelity forfeiting claims to assets? That's enforceable. The documentation about individual property ownership? That's ironclad. You structured this agreement to protect yourself, and instead you built the cage you're now locked in. You did this to yourself. And then, and this is my favorite part, the detail that made me actually laugh out loud when I heard it. Quentin Pierce hung up mid-sentence while Lauren was trying to respond. Just ended the call. Pressed the button. Decided that whatever she was about to say wasn't worth the oxygen it would take to listen to it. When your lawyer hangs up on you faster than your boyfriend ran when things got complicated, that's when you know the credits are rolling on your life story, and you're definitely not the hero. I raised my glass of bourbon to the ceiling. "To Quentin Pierce," I said, "a man who knows when to abandon ship." Jenny clinked her glass against mine. "And to the guillotine." "To the guillotine," I agreed. This was going to be fun. There's a special kind of humiliation that comes from having a government employee, someone making 40 grand a year, who probably brings leftover meatloaf for lunch, deliver news that completely destroys your entire understanding of reality. It's the bureaucratic equivalent of getting knocked out by a middle schooler in front of your friends. Embarrassing doesn't even begin to cover it. I heard about Lauren's courthouse adventure through my new favorite source of information, Margaret, Harold's assistant, who apparently had connections everywhere, including the county clerk's office, because she'd worked there 20 years ago and still had lunch with half the staff. The woman was basically a one-person intelligence agency, and I was seriously considering putting her on retainer. Lauren had shown up at the courthouse on Thursday morning, probably after spending 3 days researching emergency legal procedures on Google and convincing herself she'd found some loophole that would save her. She was wearing what Margaret's friend described as business casual, but make it desperate. A blazer that probably cost $1,000 paired with jeans, like she couldn't decide if she was going to a job interview or a breakdown, so she split the difference. She'd marched up to the property records desk with the kind of confidence that only comes from being wealthy your entire life and genuinely believing that rules are suggestions for poor people. The clerk working that day was a guy named Dennis, mid-50s, been working for the county for 30 years, had probably seen every kind of property dispute imaginable, and was thoroughly unimpressed by all of them. "I need to file an emergency claim," Lauren had announced, sliding some papers across the counter like she was making a drug deal in a movie. Dennis, according to Margaret's source, had looked at the papers with the enthusiasm of someone being asked to explain their job for the 1,000th time. "What kind of claim?" "On my house. My husband changed the locks and I need immediate access to my property." Dennis had nodded slowly, typed something into his computer with the hunt and peck method that all government employees seem to use, and pulled up the property records. He'd stared at the screen for a moment, squinted, clicked a few things, squinted again, and then done that thing that people do when they're about to deliver bad news and aren't quite sure how to phrase it. "Ma'am," he'd said, with the kind of patience usually reserved for explaining things to very small children or very confused tourists, "your name isn't on the deed." Lauren had frozen. Complete statue mode. The kind of stillness that comes right before either violence or tears, with no in-between options. "What do you mean my name isn't on the deed? We live there. That's my house." Dennis had turned his monitor around, something he probably wasn't technically supposed to do, but was definitely doing anyway, because this was getting interesting and his shift didn't end for another 4 hours. "See here? The property is solely owned by..." He'd squinted at the screen. "Your husband. Has been for the last 3 years." "That's impossible. I would have known. I would have had to sign something." "You did sign something, ma'am." Dennis had clicked through a few more screens, pulled up a document, and pointed at a signature with a pen that was attached to the desk by one of those sad little chains. "That's your signature on a disclaimer deed from 3 years ago. October 15th, 2022. Notarized and everything." Lauren had leaned in, stared at the screen, and I imagine her brain had started doing that Windows error sound on repeat. Because yes, that was definitely her signature. I remembered that day clearly. We'd been refinancing the house to get a better interest rate, and the mortgage broker had suggested putting it solely in my name because my credit score was higher and it would save us about $200 a month. Lauren had been busy, distracted, already mentally checked out of our marriage, though I hadn't known it yet, and she'd signed the disclaimer deed without really reading it because she trusted me to handle the boring stuff. She used to mock me for that, actually, for being the one who handled all the paperwork, who read every document, who saved every receipt, and filed everything in color-coded folders that she called obsessive and unnecessary. She'd roll her eyes when I'd ask her to review things before signing. "Just handle it," she'd say. "That's what you're good at." Guess who was laughing now? Hint, he wears flannel, drinks mid-tier whiskey, and apparently had been playing 4D chess while everyone else was playing checkers. "But I live there," Lauren had repeated, her voice getting higher, more desperate. "I've lived there for 7 years." Dennis had given her the look. "You know the one. I'm sorry your life is falling apart, but I literally cannot help you because that's not how property law works. Look, ma'am, residency and ownership are 2 different things. You may have lived there, but you don't own it. And if the owner has asked you to leave..." He'd trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air like bad cologne. The death stare Lauren had given that poor clerk, according to my sources, could have melted steel. Dennis didn't deserve it. He was just a guy doing his job, reading the records, following the law. But Lauren looked at him like he'd personally orchestrated her downfall, instead of just being the messenger delivering the news that she'd orchestrated it herself. She'd left the courthouse looking, in Margaret's friend's words, like someone had just deleted her from Google and she was only now realizing she existed. I was home when I got the text with this story, sitting in my office, working on absolutely nothing, drinking coffee that was too good for a Thursday afternoon. I read through the whole thing twice, smiled, and sent Margaret a message. Remind me to send you another fruit basket. Her response, make it wine this time. Done deal. If you've ever wanted to know what psychological warfare looks like when it's wrapped in expensive stationery and delivered with perfect timing, let me paint you a picture. It was exactly 2 days after Lauren's humiliating courthouse experience, and she'd been living in a Holiday Inn Express. Not even a nice hotel, just one of those budget chains with continental breakfast and wallpaper that looks like it was designed by someone who'd never seen colors in real life. The kind of place where the pillows are flat. The shower has exactly 2 water pressure settings, trickle and assault. And you can hear your neighbor's entire life stories through walls made of what I'm pretty sure was cardboard and prayers. Margaret had texted me Lauren's location about an hour after she'd checked in, along with the room number, because apparently Harold's assistant had decided that her true calling in life was being my personal private investigator. I didn't ask how she'd gotten this information. Some questions are better left unanswered, especially when the answers probably involve security camera access and friendly relationships with hotel staff who were bored and loved drama. I'd spent 2 days planning this next move. Not because it was complicated, it really wasn't, but because timing is everything, and I wanted this to land at exactly the right moment. Too early, and she'd still have fight left in her. Too late, and she'd already be numb to the hits. But right now? Right now, she was in that perfect sweet spot of desperate, confused, and still clinging to the hope that maybe things could be salvaged. Time to crush that hope like an empty beer can. I'd gone to one of those fancy stationery stores, the kind where they sell paper that costs more per sheet than most people spend on lunch. The kind of place where everything is in cursive and the employees look at you like you're personally offending them by touching things with your peasant hands. I'd bought a deep green envelope. Not Christmas green, but that rich, expensive-looking forest green that screamed important correspondence from people who matter. I'd also bought a matching card with creamy white cardstock that probably cost $15 and felt like it was made from angel wings and the tears of pretentious poets. Then I'd gone home and gotten creative. The photo was the centerpiece of this little psychological operation. I'd taken it 3 days ago, right after Lauren's life had started its spectacular downward spiral. It showed me our son Marcus, who'd been surprisingly cool about the divorce once I'd explained that his mother had been lying to everyone, and Harold, all standing in front of the house. Our house. My house. The house that Lauren no longer had any claim to, despite having lived there for 7 years. We were smiling. Real smiles, not those fake say cheese smiles that people do for obligatory family photos. Marcus was in the middle, wearing his college hoodie, looking happy in that way that kids look when their parents aren't forcing them to pretend everything is fine. Harold was on his right, wearing one of his expensive cashmere sweaters, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in years. And I was on Marcus's left, casual in jeans and a flannel shirt, holding a cup of coffee and genuinely enjoying the moment. It looked like a Christmas card. It looked like family. It looked like everything Lauren had thrown away. Below the photo, I'd written in my best handwriting, and I'd practiced this like I was taking a penmanship class, because presentation matters. Thank you for the gift. We've moved on. Simple, clean, devastating. But I wasn't done. Because why send one knife when you can send two? The second page was a legal notice, professionally printed on law firm letterhead from Elias Finch's office. It informed Lauren Whitmore that she had been formally removed from the Whitmore Family Trust, effective immediately. No inheritance, no future claims, no board seat on any family companies, not even her name left on the official documents. She'd been erased from the family legacy like a typo in a corporate memo. Harold had signed it himself. I'd watched him do it, sitting in his study with that shark smile, using his Mont Blanc fountain pen that probably cost more than my first car. He'd looked at the document, looked at me, and said, She chose poorly. I don't reward poor choices. I'd slid everything into that beautiful green envelope, sealed it with one of those wax seals that I bought specifically for this purpose. Because if you're going to be dramatic, commit to it, and addressed it to Lauren Whitmore, room 237, Holiday Inn Express. I'd driven to the hotel myself, parked in the back lot where the security cameras had a blind spot. Thanks again, Margaret, for that information, and walked up to the second floor like I belonged there. Room 237 was at the end of a hallway that smelled like cleaning products and regret. I could hear a TV playing in one of the nearby rooms, some talk show with a laugh track that sounded canned and desperate. Lauren's room was quiet. Either she was out, or she was inside having an existential crisis. Either way worked for me. I'd knelt down, slid the envelope under her door with the care of someone delivering something precious, and then walked away. Didn't wait around. Didn't knock. Didn't make it dramatic. Just delivered the message and left. Because sometimes the scariest thing isn't the monster jumping out at you. It's finding something terrible waiting for you when you least expect it. According to Margaret, who apparently had sources everywhere, including possibly the FBI, Lauren had returned to her room about 20 minutes later. She'd been carrying takeout from whatever sad restaurant was nearby that delivered to hotels. Probably something depressing like lo mein that had gotten cold during transport, eaten with plastic forks while sitting on a bed that sagged in the middle. She'd almost stepped on the envelope, literally almost walked right past it. But that green color caught her eye, because expensive stationery has a way of demanding attention even when you're exhausted and defeated and possibly contemplating whether wine for dinner counts as a meal. Margaret's source said Lauren had picked it up like it might explode, which honestly wasn't that far off from reality. Psychological explosions count as explosions. She'd opened it standing in the doorway, probably because some part of her brain knew that whatever was inside wasn't going to be good news, and she wanted the option to flee. The photo apparently hit her first. Me, Marcus, Harold, smiling in front of the house. The house she used to think of as hers. The family she used to be part of. The life she'd gambled away on an affair with a guy whose greatest accomplishment was having really good hair. Then she'd read the message. Thank you for the gift. We've moved on. Then the legal notice. Removed from the family trust. Inheritance gone. Board seat gone. Everything that came with the Whitmore name, gone. Margaret's source, who I was starting to think might actually be the hotel's cleaning staff, because how else would they know this, said Lauren had stood there for a full minute just staring at the papers. Not crying. Not screaming. Just staring, like her brain was buffering and couldn't quite process what she was seeing. Then she'd gone into her room and closed the door. The source couldn't tell me what happened after that, but honestly, I didn't need to know. The silence was louder than any reaction could have been. Back at home, I was settling into the couch with a glass of wine. The good stuff from Harold's private collection that he'd given me as a welcome to the family, the actual family gift, when my phone buzzed. A text from Harold. Document delivered and received. Well played. I texted back. Learn from the best. His response. Damn right. Marcus came downstairs, grabbed a soda from the fridge, and flopped onto the recliner. Did you send it? Sent it. Think she'll call. If she does, I won't answer. He nodded, understanding in that way that kids do when they've watched their parents' marriage fall apart and have chosen sides. Good. She made her choices. Time for consequences. Smart kid. Gets it from his father. Outside, snow was falling again, covering everything in fresh white powder. The house was warm. The fire was crackling. Life was pretty damn good. Lauren used to call herself the future of the family. Now she wasn't even a footnote in their history. Turns out, actions have consequences. Who knew? New Year's Eve has always been one of those holidays that's either absolutely magical or completely depressing, with no middle ground. You're either at the best party of your life, kissing someone at midnight while fireworks explode and champagne flows, or you're sitting alone watching the ball drop on TV while eating leftover Chinese food and contemplating your life choices. This New Year's Eve, this one was shaping up to be somewhere in between, which honestly was fine by me. I'd had enough drama for 1 year. One lifetime, really. I was at home, deliberately staying low-key, when I got the text from Marcus. Mom just showed up at Grandpa's. This is gonna be good. Want me to live stream it? I laughed, texted back, tempting but no, and then immediately reconsidered and added, actually keep me updated. Because yeah, I'm petty. We've established this. I'd embraced it. Being petty was my New Year's resolution for the year that was ending, and I'd absolutely crushed that goal. Lauren, apparently having spent the last week cycling through all 5 stages of grief, plus a few bonus stages that psychologists haven't named yet, had decided that New Year's Eve was the perfect time to confront her father. Because nothing says healthy coping mechanisms, like barging into your estranged parents' mansion on a major holiday to demand explanations for consequences that you yourself caused. According to Marcus, who was there because Harold had invited him for dinner, a fact that probably drove Lauren even more insane when she found out. She'd arrived around 8 p.m. Not called ahead, not asked permission. Just showed up at the gates, somehow got through. Marcus thought maybe she'd climbed the fence again, which would be the second time in 2 weeks, and honestly impressive from a cardio standpoint, and stormed into the house like she was storming the beaches of Normandy. Harold had been in his study, doing what Harold did best, sitting in an expensive chair, drinking expensive tea, and radiating the kind of calm power that comes from knowing you've already won before the fight even started. You gave him everything. Lauren had apparently screamed, not even bothering with pleasantries or hello or any of those social niceties that normal people use when entering rooms. Just straight to the accusations, volume at maximum, emotional regulation at 0. Harold, according to Marcus, who was texting me updates like he was a sports commentator, had calmly poured himself more tea. Not regular tea. That fancy loose-leaf stuff that costs $50 an ounce and requires special pots and specific water temperatures. He'd taken his time with it too, letting the silence stretch out while Lauren stood there shaking with rage. No, Harold had finally said, his voice quieter than hers, but somehow carrying more weight. You gave him everything. Classic Harold. The man could destroy you with a single sentence and never raise his voice. Lauren had apparently tried to argue, tried to explain, tried to justify everything that had happened like it was all some big misunderstanding instead of a series of calculated decisions that had backfired spectacularly. She'd blamed me for being vindictive, blamed Bradley for being incompetent, blamed the board for being disloyal, blamed everyone except the one person actually responsible for the mess. Harold had let her talk, just sat there, sipping his tea, letting her exhaust herself the way you let a toddler tire themselves out during a tantrum. When she finally ran out of steam, when her voice got hoarse and her arguments got circular, Harold had set down his teacup with a soft clink against the saucer. I didn't choose him over you, he'd said. I chose dignity. That one hurt. Marcus said he could see it land, see Lauren physically recoil like the words had actual weight behind them. He's manipulative, she'd started. He's thorough, Harold interrupted. There's a difference. You married a man who never raised his voice. You should have asked yourself why. And there it was. The truth she'd been avoiding for who knows how long. I didn't win by being louder or meaner or more aggressive. I won by being patient, by being thorough, by doing my homework while everyone else was winging it. I won by reading the fine print that everyone else ignored. I won by understanding that silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. Lauren had stood there shaking, Marcus reported, probably realizing the truth for the first time. She hadn't been destroyed by some elaborate revenge plot. She'd signed her own defeat into existence, one decision at a time, one ignored warning at a time, one moment of thinking she was smarter than everyone else at a time. Harold had taken another sip of tea. You're welcome to stay for the countdown, he'd said. But I suspect you'd rather not. Lauren had left. Didn't say goodbye to Marcus. Didn't apologize. Just turned and walked out of that mansion for what was probably the last time, her heels clicking on marble floors that echoed with finality. Marcus texted, she's gone. Grandpa says Happy New Year, and also he's investing in your business idea. I smiled. Harold and I had talked about a consulting firm I'd been considering. Apparently corporate warfare looked good on my resume. As midnight approached, I stood by the window with a glass of whiskey, the expensive kind now, because I could afford it, and watched fireworks start to explode across the city skyline. Somewhere out there, Lauren was probably alone, probably devastated, probably finally understanding what she'd lost. I raised my glass to the window. Merry Christmas, Lauren, I said quietly to the night. And Happy New Year. Next time, read the fine print. The fireworks exploded in showers of gold and silver. My phone buzzed. Jenny, Happy New Year, you magnificent bastard. Marcus, fireworks, New Year, new life, old furniture is thriving. Harold, Well played. See you Monday to discuss business. I smiled, took the final sip of whiskey, and watched the old year burn away in brilliant light. Turns out, sometimes the good guy does win. He just has to be willing to read the contract first.